Affairs budget in a really dramatic way. And we've been enormously successful in gaining new and increased assets for the department, and particularly in the personnel area, which is something that I did and now Nancy is doing. And it leads me to say to you that, we have hundreds and hundreds of new officers coming into the Foreign Service today. And you might well have in your own mind a question as to what about the younger generation? What about the quality of what's coming into the Foreign Service? And I would attest to you from the outside that they are magnificent people. They are stupendous. While I teach at George Washington University now, I come into contact with this wonderfully new generation of youth. They are enthusiastic. They are passionate about foreign affairs. They are devoted to their country, and the word service is constantly on their lips and in their mind. I do my best to encourage them to come into the Foreign Service. I tell every one of them, I'm so totally biased that if you accept what I just said without going to look for someone who's got a few negatives, you're not a very good analyst, because I have a passion, and if I could start it all over again, I would. Thank you again very, very much.
Congratulations, Skip. It's also heartening for me to know there is life after the Director General. So. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Undersecretary for Management, Patrick Kennedy, who many of you know very, very well. Ambassador Kennedy.
Thank you very much, and good morning. As someone who has been in this building for more than a few years, it's always a great pleasure to look out at an audience such like this and see so many old friends and colleagues. The annual Foreign Affairs Day is an important outreach event intended not only to acknowledge the importance of your service, but to provide you with some of the latest information concerning the Department's policy priorities and initiatives. I'd like to spend a few minutes outlining several of the major management initiatives we currently have underway and that we'll be working on over the next years, and then leave a sufficient amount of time, I hope, for any questions that you might have. In July of last year, Secretary Clinton launched what she calls the Quadrennial Diplomacy and Development Review, with the goal of strengthening and elevating diplomacy and development cooperation as key pillars of U.S. foreign policy. Through aligning policy, strategy, authorities, and resources, the QDDR will provide the blueprint for our diplomatic and development efforts in the years ahead. The end goals are unified smart power, clear, mutually reinforcing state and USAID roles and missions, and tangible organizational changes leading to improved performance. Phase 1 of the QDDR was a strategic thinking exercise involving state, aid, and other U.S. government agency stakeholders, as well as external actors. This review process identified the outcomes and capabilities of state and aid across the spectrum of diplomacy and development. It focused our efforts on distinguishing the current 20th century way of operating from what is now being demanded of us in this new 21st century, given the global trends driving QDR recommendations. Global engagement will need to be a more targeted and strategic effort, particularly with non-state actors. The state and USAID officers need diplomacy skills beyond those that have been bilateral only in the past. The final report will be issued in September 2010, and with implementation of the QDDR recommendations, we'll begin the process of more closely aligning policy, processes, and human and financial resources to ensure that state and USAID will have the capabilities to meet the 21st century foreign policy challenges. As you're all aware, fiscal challenges facing the federal government as a whole are immense, and they will undoubtedly have an impact on the international affairs budget. You read the newspapers, you watch the television, you see the Sunday morning or the Friday night talk shows. We face immense challenges. We have some initial indications of those challenges from the House and Senate budget committees, which are proposing funding levels for international affairs significantly below that requested by the President. However, you can be assured that the Department, the Secretary, the Deputy Secretary, Assistant Secretary Verma, myself, and our colleagues in the Department's Budget Office are deeply engaged with all elements of the Hill at every level of this issue. Fundamentally, more is being demanded of the Department and its people, and that requires sufficient resources to get our job done. Thanks to the Secretary's efforts over the last 2 years, in fiscal years 9 and 10, which we're in now, we have made significant progress towards getting the resources we need to be successful. Additional funds for operating expenses, additional funds for salaries, additional funds for our locally engaged staff overseas, who you all know are critical elements in anything we do, and additional positions both for essential training, which we had fallen significantly behind on, and for new positions around the world in order that we will be able to carry on these new missions. What we need to do is not lose ground now. This is especially relevant with respect to our programs in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, all of which require additional program funding, as well as staffing and commensurate infrastructure as we transition, especially in Iraq, to civilian-led efforts. In Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, the Department continues to align its resources to meet the President's objectives in bringing stability to the region. In Iraq, as part of the military drawdown, Embassy Baghdad and its provincial reconstruction teams are preparing to take over many of the capacity-building programs formerly administered by DoD. The human and financial requirements for providing secure facilities and movement in the absence of DoD are immense, even if we take advantage of what resources DoD may be leaving behind. In Afghanistan, the Department is expanding its efforts to help the Afghan people develop a stable, democratic, and economically successful nation. The Department has been charged with coordinating the civilian uplift, the increase in staffing across all agencies of the U.S. government, to make sure that we have the expertise and the resources in place throughout Afghanistan to carry out these new programs. We are already putting the necessary facilities in place and working on opening 2 new consulates in Afghanistan to accommodate this growing civilian presence, and the FY 2010 supplemental requests funding for hundreds of state and interagency positions that will be assigned in Afghanistan. Likewise, in Pakistan, more staff and resources are required to strengthen our diplomatic platform as we increase our level of assistance to this critical nation. The FY 2010 supplemental requests funding for both additional foreign service positions as well as locally engaged staff to effectively manage expanding programs, support services, and infrastructure. In 2010, we anticipate filling 630 positions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan above current levels, and we'll be also moving potentially for even more additional positions in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So we need to continue to think about how we are going to continue to staff these posts through incentive packages and other means. You have all heard about the stimulus bill that the Congress passed last year. The Department was fortunate to receive approximately $550 million in American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funds, which are being used to create jobs, reduce global warming by greening our facilities, and expand consular services offered to the American people.